Hey guys, how's it going? Marine King here with part 4 of the Grand Tournament pre-review of all the cards. Today I'm going to be covering the Shaman and Warlock cards. I'm going to try to get through this relatively quickly and get right to the key points. If you would like to skip this video and you want to go straight to the scores for the cards, please look at the description at the bottom of this video and you'll see everything sorted by order of appearance in the video. Alright, so right away, starting with the Shaman cards, the 2 mana 3/4 Totem Golem Overload 1. It's a totem, and this card is absolutely awesome. This card was brilliantly designed, and I want to applaud Blizzard for creating this card. This is exactly what Shamans needed. It's an absolute powerhouse at turn 2 / coining turn 1. This is just so great of a thing to do. Totally worth the overload cost. Even if you were to play this at 3 mana, this would still be quite nice because 3/4 stats for 3 mana total is really awesome. And the fact that it has a totem tag just makes it that much more awesome. Now add in the fact that you get to split the mana cost between 2 turns, which is better than having 3 mana total in 1 turn. This card is really awesome because if you play it on turn 2 and you go over to turn 3, then you still have 2 mana that you can use on turn 3 to do a hero power or play something. But worst case scenario, you hit your hero power and make another totem. This card is going to make aggro decks cry. This is going to give hunters, face hunters, and Shakadins a very hard time. And I think that this is one of those cards that's really going to pull Shaman from the trash, from the gutter, where it currently is in the meta, and make it a viable class once again. I love this card, and I would rate this card a 9 out of 10. I think that everybody would do well to run 2 of these in their Shaman deck. Up next, Draenei Totemcarver. I've been told that the way to pronounce that is Draenei. So Draenei. The 4 mana 4/4 battle cry, gain 1/1 for each friendly totem. The potential of this card is really great, but that is a somewhat steep requirement, and it makes the card somewhat situational as far as getting a lot of value off of it, because a 4/4 for 4 mana is not good. A 5/5 for 4 mana would just be only okay by today's standards. A long time ago that would have been great, but today we have to compare all 4 drops now to the Goblin Shredder. So Goblin Shredder has become the new baseline, whereas a long time ago it used to be Yeti. Now we have to look at every 4 drop, and we have to say to ourselves within reason, how does this card perform against the Goblin Shredder? And even at a 5/5, it would still lose out most of the time to a Goblin Shredder, because of the fact that Shredder, its stats are already going to be a 4/3, of course, by default, and usually mathematically another 2/2 comes out of it, usually. So now basically you're dealing with a 6/5 worth of stats usually that comes out of it. So the fact also that it's a death rattle makes it sticky to the board. That's why it is such a good 4-drop, and that's why it's basically replaced everything else as being the new baseline. So therefore, when we rate this card, we have to think, how many totems would it take to actually make this card as good and better than a Goblin Shredder? And the answer is you would have to have a minimum of 2 totems on the board, and even then it's questionable on whether or not a 6/6 would be equal to a Goblin Shredder, because Goblin Shredder is just that great. So to say you would have 2 totems on the board is quite iffy. That's a pretty high requirement. So I think that this card is a little too situational to become an auto-include into Shaman decks. I think that this card will see some play, but it's really not an amazing card, and it's certainly not a card that you go, wow, you know, I need to go out there and craft this card. This is certainly a card you can pass up, and if you do run it, you'll probably most of the time just have okay results. I would rate this card as a 6 out of 10. Tuskarr Totemic. 3 mana, 3/2, battle cry, summon any random totem. You know what? I think that this card is really great. This is another one of those cards that is fantastic. I would definitely suggest running 2 of these in just about every Shaman deck. I think that this is one of those cards that is going to help revive Shaman, drag it out of the gutter, and make it a competitive class once more. This card, I would rate this as a 9 out of 10. First of all, a 3/2 is not so bad for 3 mana because of the way that the game is. Now, take into consideration you are going to summon a totem, which means that basically you would also kind of add on those stats too. So, in a manner of speaking, you could think about adding on 2 more stats if it's a weak totem, and more than that if it's a strong totem. So right here on the next slide I'm going to show you, this is a show of all the totems that will be in the game by the time Tuskarr Totemic comes out. So you can see here that you have a 50% chance to get one of these totems here, and if one of these comes out with the battle cry, you are in a fantastic spot. You are really far ahead as far as board, tempo. It's just pretty amazing. And if you get one of these, it's still not bad. I mean, that's pretty decent. And I think it's totally worth running this card at 3 mana. It's a fantastic value. And I don't know what more you could ask for in a card. I think everyone should run 2 of these in their Shaman decks. And I definitely believe this is one of the strong cards of the Shaman set. Again, 9 out of 10. Up next, 5 mana, 3/6, Thunder Bluff Valiant. Inspire, give your totems 2 attack. Upon first glance, I said, wow, this card is really strong, and I like this card. But, you know, when I really sat down and analyzed this card and really thought about it for a long time, I came to the conclusion that the ability is quite situational. And the stats are kind of weak, actually, for a 5 mana by today's standards. A good baseline to use, for instance, would be Lothab. That's a pretty standard 5-drop these days. So what the Thunder Bluff Valiant is able to do is not that much in terms of statistics. You could give your totems 2+ attack permanently, but if you wait to do it in the same turn, now we're talking about 7 mana. So we have to think to ourselves that this is a somewhat slow minion, and that we're reaching a pretty pivotal point in the game, because going into turn 6 is very important for Shaman. Will you really be using your Inspire on the very next turn? Well, if you have a Fire Elemental in your hand, you probably won't be playing an Inspire, because you're going to want to run your Fire Elemental. So there's a big question about, will you really be using your hero power in the next turn? Well, that remains to be a very unknown answer right there, because you know, this card is in fact slow, and it is a card that can get out of control if you have a lot of totems on the board. But realistically, most people don't allow Shaman to have too many totems on their board. They do tend to control them, with the exception of Face Hunter. And I think that you're going to struggle to really get a lot of value out of this Inspire. Now, one quick note I do want to make about this card is that The Inspire effect here happens after your hero power. So when you have this minion in play and you hit your hero power, the new totem will come out first, and then it will receive the 2+ damage buff on this. So that is one really cool thing, is so long as this is on the board, every totem you produce is going to have at least 4 worth of stats. So that is somewhat of a plus side. But I think that this card is going to see some play, but it obviously won't be an auto-include into every deck. But I do think some people are going to experiment around with this, and I think it'll have okay results. I would rate this as a 6 out of 10. Ancestral Knowledge. Oh, this card is really garbage. Draw 2 cards and overload yourself 2. Well, you're already playing 2 mana for 2 cards. Then you're going to overload yourself another 2 mana on the next turn. That to me seems rather silly for drawing 2 cards. Why would you pay 4 mana? And you would never want to play this really on turn 2, because this would completely screw up your early game tempo. I would say that this is a really bad card. I think that this was not a good design, and I'm rather disappointed in it. I rate this as a 2 out of 10, and I would not run this myself, and I don't recommend that others would really want to run this, and I don't think many people will run it. 4 mana, 2/4 charged hammer weapon. Your hero power becomes deal 2 damage upon death rattle. Quick note, the death rattle is permanent after this breaks. And the other note I want to make is that one strategy you can do with this card is to break it ahead of time with another weapon, break it yourself, and you can immediately have access to your new hero power. You can choose any target, including the enemy space or any of their minions or any of your minions or even your own face, if for whatever the reason you need to. So this weapon is really slow. And that's really the thing that jumps out at me right away, is that to use this in a control deck will not be as easy as a lot of people may wish it were. I think that upon this card being revealed, the general consensus was that this is a control type of card, that you can use this weapon to remove threats, and then you'll have access to this hero power that you can further use to control the board. I disagree with that completely. You will not want to deal 2 damage at turn 4 upward. That's not enough damage to actually clear anything. So when I look at this card, I'm going to tell you why I think this card was designed. This card is actually an aggressive card, and I think that the general idea behind this was to use it in an aggro deck or a fast deck such as Mech Shaman. And I think that the point about this was that you equip this card, start hitting the enemy's face, and then you break it yourself, probably for the 3/2 weapon, the mech hammer, and start hitting their face with that. And then you also have your hero power now to ping their face. And I think that's really what this card was all about. I think this was purely a setup for aggression. I do not think you can use this in a control environment. You would be turn 8 before you could actually use that hero power, and by then dealing 2 damage to your hero power wouldn't be enough to help you control the board. I would rate this card as a 5 out of 10. And again, I think specifically this card was to be used in an aggro deck where you're going to be playing a lot of damage to the enemy's face. Healing Wave, 3 mana, restore 7 health, reveal a minion in each deck. If yours costs more, restore 14 instead. So this spell is really going to enable, in my opinion, a new type of shamans to surface. I think with this card, now shamans finally have a chance to get into real control decks, get into decks that have strong setups and combos where you previously could not really run those types of decks without fear of just getting destroyed by aggro. There's a lot of cards that Shaman has always had access to, which are quite powerful, like Reincarnate combinations, things that involve, Ancestrals, Reincarnations, Sylvanas Windrunner, Death Rattle decks involving cards like Stalag and Fugen, Baron Riverdare. Those types of decks are very powerful, and with those types of decks, you would be favored in most mid-range versus control or control versus control matchups. The reason that you never see those types of decks, though, is because until now, Shaman did not really have options for healing, and playing the Vitality Totem just wasn't good enough. So this card is great, because even if you play it for 3 mana and get 7 health, that's not bad. That's okay. But if you get 14, this is a total game changer. With this, you can finally have confidence to really run some very late game decks. You can get really greedy and run this card. And I think that this is going to be a game changer. I think that this is one of those cards that will revitalize Shaman as a class. Hunters are going to cry. Shakanins are going to cry. This card is, in my opinion, amazing, and I would rate it as an 8 out of 10. Now, would you want to run 2 of this card? I'm not sure. You might want to start with 1 and then have some other type of healing options, such as the Anti-Killbot, Earthen Farseer, and maybe just run 1 of these cards to start, because if you have 2 in your hand, that'd be kind of awkward. Elemental Destruction, 3 mana spell, deal 4 to 5 damage to all minions with an overload of 5. I think that this card, when I look at this, is... Okay, first of all, let me say this. When this card was revealed, I noticed that there was a really bad, a really negative public reaction about this card. And the idea was that it really sucked because you dealt enough damage to maybe clear the enemy's board, maybe. But the thing is, with so many death rattles now, you probably weren't going to get a clean clear. And the other problem was that the overload of 5 basically completely destroyed your next turn. So a lot of people felt that you would do really well this turn and then you completely pass the next turn. And to that I would say not necessarily. And the reason why is because when I look at this card, I could tell you right now, this card specifically was meant to be run in a deck that runs Lava Shock as well. You do not run this card without also running 2 copies of Lava Shock. So, for those of you who don't know, Lava Shock is a 1 mana spell that deals 2 damage and unlocks your locked mana crystals. So I would not dare run this card without Lava Shock. But this card with Lava Shock wouldn't be that bad. A total of, 3 mana for 4 to 5 damage to all minions. That's great. This is already could be compared already to Flame Strike, and Flame Strike is a 7 mana spell that deals only 4 damage across the board. So this is only one mana more total, 8 mana. And if you're running dual Lava Shocks, the chances are very high that you'll get this card out there for 3. And I think that when you look at it that way, I think there is strong potential to be had with this card, but my gripe about it is that it will be completely dependent upon whether or not you have Lava Shock in your hand. Because if you don't have it in your hand, you're not going to want to run this card. And if you do run it, you are going to be destroyed by the fact that you will not be able to do anything for the next turn, basically. So taking all that into consideration, I do rate it as a 6 out of 10. I do think that there's a place for it in some decks, though, and you might also want to look into trying this in a deck with Earthbound and Unbound Elemental. And the last card of the set, the 6 mana legendary, the Mistcaller. 4/4, give all your minions in your hand and your deck 1/1. So, quick note for those who don't know, this basically buffs every minion that you will play. Both in your hand and in your entire deck. So everything you play from then on is going to have +1/1, with the exception of minions that are summoned by other minions. So if you were to play, for instance, the Murloc, the 2/1 Murloc that summons a 1/1 Murloc, the 2/1 would come out as a 3/2, but the Murloc at summon would still be a 1/1 because that technically wasn't the card, and it does not apply to summoned minions. I think that this card got a really negative reaction from most people when this was revealed, but I think the card is really not too bad. You have to consider that with the new cards that we're looking at in Shaman, especially Healing Wave, they are getting us prepared for a much more late game Shaman. And if you think about a very late game Shaman, a very drawn out grinder Shaman, this card does have a good potential. I think that the effect will really come back to haunt the enemy, and it will start to really has some tremendous effect after about 3 minions that you play. Obviously 4/4 for 6 is bad, but it's the same principle as a Emperor Tharisan. 5/5 for 6 is bad, but his lowering the mana cost of everything in your hand makes it worth it. Well, this is very similar. Makes every card that much better. So, I think that this is not really too bad. As far as, how important is it to have this legendary? It's really not that important, though. You could take it or leave it because there's plenty of things you can be doing with 6 mana. Fire Elementals, Sylvanas Windrunner. There's a lot of competition at 6, and this is one of those cards that you don't really need that much. So I don't think anyone out there is going to need to be in a hurry to craft it, but I think if you run it, you'll have okay results in a very drawn out deck, and you have your taunts together and you have your healing together. So I'd rate that as a 7 out of 10. And that's the entire Shaman set. Overall, I would say that Shaman got 3 really good cards that are going to boost Shaman as a class. Again, it's the Totem Golem, the Tuskarr Totemic, and the Healing Wave. I think that those 3 cards are going to enable Shaman to come back as a class and be probably not the worst class anymore. I don't know how good of a class it will actually be, but my guess is that it will be better than Priest for sure, and maybe better than Rogue. So up next are the Warlock cards. We're going to start with this card, the 2 mana spell Demonfuse. Give a demon +3/3. Give your opponent a mana crystal. This card is stupid. It's really bad. It has gotten a negative reception overall from the HearthStone community, and I share that opinion that this effect is far too weak for the drawback that you're getting. First of all, buffing cards are not good as a general rule. Buffing is not that valuable because of the fact that you're investing multiple cards now into one minion. And due to the nature of Hearthstone as a game, most people tend to remove everything that's played, and it's kind of a back and forth turntable of you play something and I remove it, and then I play something, you remove it, and we keep removing each other's stuff. So to invest a lot of cards into one card has historically proven to be a bad decision. Giving 3/3 for 2 is already not that great just by itself, but when you take into consideration you're going to give the opponent a permanent mana crystal, that is just completely dumb. I do not know why Blizzard bothered to create this card. My guess is they figured that that Warlock just did not need any more powerful spells. Wrathguard, 2 mana for 3. Whenever this minion takes damage, also deal that damage to your hero. Oh, by the way, I never gave a score on that last card. 2 out of 10 for the Demonfuse. Really bad. I don't think it's going to see any play. Wrathguard, whenever this minion takes damage, also deal that amount to your hero. This card is not that exciting to me. I think it's pretty bad. And the reason why is because you basically could only run this card in a very aggressive Warlock deck. Now, the problem with that is that basically there are no aggressive Warlock decks. None really exist. The last time there was an aggressive Warlock deck was when the game first came out. Murloc Warlock is the last time I can think about a deck that really was focused a lot on damaging your enemy's face, at least through minions. I think that this card just does not really have a place in any Warlock archetypes, current or otherwise, because you cannot play this with the hope to control the board. It's really bad for that. I think that most of the time Warlocks would rather have something that's sticky to the board, and I just think that this card is kind of silly. And then to add insult, that drawback, deal that amount of damage to your hero, well, now that makes this card completely unplayable against any kind of aggro deck that the Warlock player would be facing, because this card is suicide against Hunter, suicide against Mage, it's suicide against any kind of aggressive Paladin. I think that there are far too many ways that this card will mess you up, and because of the fact it's a 4/3 instead of a 3/4, it just has bad stats. Half of the 2 drops now have 3 HP. This is really fragile, and having 4 attack, it's just not that useful. Up next, that last card. I would rate this as a 4 out of 10. I mean, it does have a lot of stats for 2 mana, so I have to give it some points. But I think it's kind of silly, though, to take that drawback and take into consideration there's just not a lot of use for a 4/3 for 2 mana in Shaman deck. I mean, in Warlock decks. 4 mana spell Fist of Jaraxxus. When you play or discard this, deal 4 damage to a random enemy. Well, I don't really like this card at all because, number one, the randomness. That's kind of silly. Like, since you can't choose where it's going to go, and a lot of times, especially, you'll want it to go to a minion. It might even go to the enemy's face. It just makes this card too much of a coin toss. And even then, it's really not a great value for what you're getting. Dealing 4 damage randomly for 4 mana is bad. And planning to discard cards and planning for this to be that card is also bad, because it's going to be hard to discard this card. It's going to be really hard to control that. A lot of times when you're discarding cards, you have more than one other card in your hand. So you might be holding on to this with hopes that you could discard it and then end up discarding your other card and then keeping this. It's very situational, highly situational, and really bad. Even when it does work out for you, it's still not a great value. I would rate this card as a 3 out of 10. Dreedsteed. the 4 mana 1/1 Death Rattle, summon a Dreedsteed. Yeah, I get it. You know, the card that never dies. It just sticks around forever. But in my opinion, it's far too slow. And I just think that it won't see a lot of play on that 1 point alone. Here's what's going to happen. You will play it for 4 mana and it will be largely ignored. And if you think about the fact that as the Warlock player, you have the choice to play this, a 1/1 for 4 mana, and your enemy could be playing, again, like I've said before, the standard 4-drop now, Goblin Shredder, the 4/3, you're going to be crying because that 4/3 is going to be wrecking this board or wrecking your face, while Dreedsteed does nothing for several turns, and it's so slow. And even if you were to buff it, I would say you could easily buff anything else that you wanted to play. And the only way that I see this card really being viable at all is if you were to run it also with Barren River Dare and double up the effects of it so that you could start multiplying Dreedsteeds out there. But that's quite a far-fetched gimmick, and most of the time that won't happen. And if you play Dreedsteed, I think you're going to find that it's very slow for 4 mana, and I think that's going to hurt you so much that it's not going to be worth the long-term benefits of dealing 1 damage at a time. You know, HearthStone is too fast of a game for cards like this. We don't got time for that. I would rate this card as a 3 out of 10. Up next, 2 mana 3/2. Tiny Knight of Evil. Whenever you discard a card, gain 1/1. I really don't like this card, and the reason I don't like it is because you can't plan to discard cards. If you're discarding cards, you are becoming dangerously close to losing the game every time you do. So this isn't something that you can even plan to do. You shouldn't plan to do it, and therefore most of the time you're just playing it as a 3/2 demon, and that's really nothing special. So therefore I would give this card a 2 out of 10. I just don't think there's a whole lot to be said about this card. I wouldn't run it, and I don't recommend most other people would run it. The 6 mana 5/4 Void Crusher. Inspire. Destroy a random minion for each player. Well, it gets even worse. I didn't think it could get worse than what we've already seen for Warlock, but it does get worse. Let me make a quick notation just in case you're wondering. When it says destroy a random minion for each player, it means exactly that, including the Void Crusher itself. So if you play this minion and you use the Inspire ability, you'll kill one of your other minions, and if you don't have anything else, you'll kill the very minion you just played, which is the Void Crusher. And then you don't even know which minion of the enemies that you can destroy. So now you have randomness, and then on top of that, you have the fact that the ability is always going to be a double-edged sword. There's no way to get away from this being a double-edged sword because of the fact that when you use it, you have to destroy something of your own. The best thing that can happen is maybe you set up an egg, but you can't really get away from this offset ability because, again, even if you just played only this minion, then you kill your own minion. This card is stupid, and I don't really understand the point behind Blizzard putting this into the game. It has negative synergy, and I would rate it as a 1 out of 10. So, 1 out of 10 card for Warlock. That's a really horrible rating. Surely there couldn't be any more 1 out of 10 cards for Warlock. Right? Holy shit. And there we go. 6 mana, Dark Bargain. Destroy 2 random enemy minions. Discard 2 random cards. What can I say? I just said there probably wouldn't be another 1 out of 10 card, but here we are. This card is really bad. It's garbage. And I would rate this as a 1 out of 10 too. Because you destroy 2 random enemy minions. Well, that's really silly because that's 2 random for something that costs this much. But then you would discard 2 random cards? that makes this card absolute suicide to play. If you discard 2 random cards, you're going to lose the game. If you're paying 6 mana for removals, and you don't get the perfect targets, you lose the game. If the enemy has Death Rattle minions, you are probably going to lose the game. There are so many scenarios where running this card would make you lose the game that I would never run this card, and I don't recommend anyone else run it either. It is a 1 out of 10. I think that it's a complete sham of a card, a filler card that was never intended to be run, but just that Blizzard wanted to have an even amount of cards for all the classes, save Hunter, and it just needed to basically fill it with crap that we're not going to use. And this isn't going to see play. No one's going to use this. Up next, 7 mana, 6/8, Fearsome Doomguard. It's a demon, it's 7, it's 6/8. Those are some pretty solid stats. When I look at this card, I can tell you that this card was designed to buff up your potential to do some things with the Void Caller. When the Void Caller dies and it pulls a minion onto the field, before a lot of people used to actually run the Infernals because a 6/6 demon, is pretty good. Well, this is even better. If you were to play this for 7 mana, it's not that bad. The stats are about as good as you can get, considering it's just out of big game hunter range. It is a demon. If you pull it out of your Void Caller, you're going to be really in a great place because it's big, but it's not so big that it gets big gamed, but it's big enough that it sticks to board. 8 is very fat and healthy. 8 HP. Yeah, so this card is pretty decent. This is pretty solid, and in a demon deck, I would run this card. I might even run a couple of this card. I would rate this as a 7 out of 10. Fair job. And the last card of the set, 6 mana, 4/4, Wilfred Fizzlebang, the legendary. Draw cards that you draw from your hero power now cost 0. The card is slow, obviously, and 4/4 for 6 is pretty bad. The public reception basically about this card was that most people didn't like it. They thought that this card was pretty bad. I think that it's not a horrible card, but it's not a great one either. One of my biggest concerns about it is actually this. You see that? There's nothing there because it's not a demon. Wilfred Fizzlebang, unfortunately, is not a demon, and therefore he doesn't synergize with all the demon stuff that goes on in a Warlock deck. Most of the time we run the cards that we run in Warlock because they're demons and because they have so much demon synergy. It's kind of weird playing this card with no demon synergy and hoping to get a lot out of that card text. The problem with this card text, by the way, is that within reason you probably will not be able to cast your hero power more than once, so you can only get 1 draw per turn. If this were any draw, you could draw a lot of things with like minions and stuff like that, but since it can only reduce from cards that are drawn through your hero power, that makes a very specific requirement. Now that you cannot expect that this card will live very long when you play it, because 4 HP at 6 mana is quite fragile. It probably will die as soon as you play it. So what that means is that you really would play this card with 8 mana. You would play it and you would immediately tap, and you would have to then hope that the thing you draw is something really big that was really expensive, because if you draw a low mana cost card, you're going to be absolutely screwed on tempo. And because of that, I think that this card has only limited viability. I would say that it's only a fair card, but not anything above fair. I would rate this as a 6 out of 10. So that's it for the for the Warlock cards. Overall, I would say that the Warlock cards range from really bad to barely playable. This card, for instance, is very barely playable, but the other cards are just really garbage. And, it's a very disappointing time, actually, for Warlocks who were looking forward to something exciting from the Grand Tournament. I am sorry, Warlock players. You really got nothing out of this expansion. It's pretty bad when the most exciting thing is just a 6/8 demon with no card text or any special ability. This is just a solid card, but it's the best out of the whole set. Most of the cards are really bad. You just couldn't run them. Again, 210, come on, 310, 310, 110, 110. These scores I'm giving these cards are, I really couldn't rate them any higher. My guess about this, by the way, is that in testing and looking at data, Blizzard determined that Warlock was already such a strong class that they really didn't want to make the class any better. So they didn't want to give them tools to make it better. They just wanted to give them some cards that would make the class different. And overall, there's not much of anything going on here that I would say like you need to save up gold and you need to save up your dust to use. I think the only thing that I might craft out of this whole shamil again is the Fearsome Doomguard, and that's just a common, so you don't need to save up much, guys. All right, thank you for looking at part 4 of the Grand Tournament pre-review. Make sure to catch me for part 5, where I'm going to cover the warrior cards and all of the neutral legendaries. It's going to be exciting. All right, guys. Marine King out.